How much?
How much you gotta spend?
Frank, this is more than a month's salary.
Out here, it is all about our hustle.
You really have to take us to the station.
We're everywhere. We have been everywhere for a really long time.
Yes, work! Yes, work! Yes, work! Yes, work! No bad horse! No bad horse! Just that boss!
I threw my whole heart into trying to get Suraj Patel, the first person running for national office explicitly supporting sex worker rights, to win the primary against Carolyn Maloney, who, of course, was one of the co-signers, sponsors, one of the sponsors of the FOSTA bill while it was still in the House. And, of course, we lost that election. Now, the thing about doing cocaine, emotional cocaine, literal cocaine, is that there's a crash afterwards. So what I've been doing is lying in bed, binge watching The Handmaid's Tale, which is not the answer to get out of a depression. But I do feel a sense of overwhelming clarity and purpose. So I was self-medicating with the election. I don't know how much of our listeners know about my personal background, but before I got into comedy and professional storytelling, I worked as a political operative for a progressive political consulting firm. And the thing that I loved about political activism is that there are numbers and goals and objectives and demonstrable things where, you can knock on a certain number of doors, you can raise a certain number of dollars, you can have conversations with a certain number of voters. And in my case, with this election, we organized sex workers to write over 1,600 letters to registered Democrats in Brooklyn and the Lower East Side that had never voted in a primary before, asking those voters to turn out. And we lost the election, but we increased voter turnout by over 300% in this election. And we won the Lower East Side, and we won Brooklyn. That's not nothing. We had a town hall organized by and for sex workers where we had sex worker advocates on the panel, and we had a huge number of sex workers and allies show up to ask questions of Suraj Patel. And Suraj Patel pledged his allegiance to us, not just for this election, but for his entire career. That's incredible. Suraj Patel is 35 years old. He worked in Obama's White House for 8 years. He's surrounded by smart, motivated, dedicated political operatives. And what I'll tell you is that the 3 weeks that I spent working on that campaign, I was able to have a lot of conversations with political science majors who were interning from Columbia, right? From NYU students who were there volunteering, or from policy people, policy experts and political operatives that are focused on making a better future. And you know what? Every single one of them listened to me and heard us, heard our collective cry, and recognized that sex worker rights is an issue that they're going to be paying more attention to moving forward. So not only did we convince Suraj Patel, but we convinced every single person that volunteered on Suraj Patel's campaign to take this issue seriously. And it might not feel like that's a victory, but what I know as a historian and as a political operative is that the story of civil rights is long and arduous and full of itty-bitty, teeny-tiny, incremental victories and defeats that lead up to moments that history books then later pretend are overnight sensations, right? I learned as a comedian, as a woman that works in entertainment, there's no such thing as an overnight success. It's just suddenly somebody starts paying attention to the work that you've been doing for a decade or two, and the same can be said of social movements. We changed a lot of hearts and minds with this election, and there's no going back. So although Suraj Patel lost against, bigwig corporate Democrat Carolyn Maloney, who'd been in office for 27 years with over half her money coming from corporate PACs, and that was supposed to be, a popular upset, right? This is what the resistance coming in. We were hoping to primary her. Suraj Patel lost against Carolyn Maloney. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her election, upsetting longtime corporate mainstream Democrat. She is coming in specifically supported by the Democratic Socialists of America, who have adopted a pro-sex worker rights platform and have been with us on these issues. If you guys are looking for some incredible organizers and activists to get involved with, I cannot support the Democratic Socialists of America more. They're doing really, really great work, and they're supporting sex worker rights. So we have one person who's going to Congress in this overwhelmingly Democratic district who knows that sex workers are people and stands for the larger platform against the prison industrial complex that is eating our citizens. I was self-medicating with this election because being a goal crusher and achieving measurable goals like letter writing and trying to move the electorate is something that I can focus on and something that I can achieve because I can't solve whorephobia. It's the Democratic primary, so we don't have any Republicans in office, but this is Trump's America, and it's impossible not to have the looming threat of an authoritarian state seemingly every day getting worse. We just lost Supreme Court Justice Kennedy, beginning the slippery slope of the erosion of our rights and the attack on women's autonomy, not just our right to say yes to sex that we want, but also our right to say no to pregnancies we don't. But, my father's a Republican, and my father is a Vietnam vet and a man who believes that men are men and women are women, and good women don't want to have sex. And that was something that he communicated to me throughout my childhood, even though he loves me very much. I know that we've both made choices that the other one wished that they didn't. And I know that I know that I felt like I had more choices than my father did, and that the choices my father made gave me more choices, right? My father climbed his way up the social ladder through other men's blood to give me options. And the fact that I used those choices to have sex for money is a source of tension between us to this day. And I know that that is something that the Republican Party would very much like to punish uppity, mouthy women across America. And my mother reminds me a lot of Carolyn Maloney. She's the kind of woman who thinks that she knows better, believes that she's the kind of person that can legislate her way out of all kinds of bullshit. And so it was interesting to stand outside of the polls and have women, mostly my mother's age, coming up to me, telling me that I was representing, basically an uppity person that shouldn't be running for office and had no business upsetting the Democratic Party line and being a bad feminist for supporting a male insurgent against a longtime female representative. And it was a moment of clarity for me, probably because I hadn't had a lot of sleep the night before, and probably because both of my parents have spent a long time recently telling me how lucky I am to have such a great boyfriend and how great it is that an Eagle Scout with money from my own hometown, is kind enough to love some professional mouthy whore operating at a loss, And I realized that I'm not really trying to convince the electorate that sex workers are people. I'm trying to convince my parents. So I think it's important to recognize that the places that sex workers sent handwritten letters to turned out for this election, and they voted for Suraj Patel. We could only get 1,600 letters out. We lost this election by more than 10,000 votes. So that was not, but I want you guys that volunteered to write letters to know that you made a measurable impact on this election. Your letters got people to the polls in a way that they never have before. Less than 7% of registered Democrats voted in the last primary. Less than 2% of those people were under the age of 35. We changed those numbers. We gave Carolyn Maloney a run for her money, and we showed the Democratic establishment that there are more people in their district that they are not talking to. And if they talk to them, then they will show up for the polls. And I think that matters because there's going to be another election and one after that. And then after that one, there's going to be another one. So you have to understand that we are building a movement, and even though it is slow and incremental and sometimes feels like it's going back and forth, we are pushing forward on this story. And after Suraj Patel proved to people running for office all over the country that you can support sex worker rights and get nothing but positive media feedback. There wasn't a single story that ran about Suraj Patel's support of sex worker rights and running against the SESTA-FOSTA law that passed that called him a trafficking supporter. Nobody went with that narrative, right? We are a part of changing the stories that are told about us. And we were welcomed to the table. And then once we were welcomed to the table, we took a seat at that table. I worked with so many other old pros on Suraj Patel's campaign, and I got to tell you how exciting and liberating it was to just sit down at a campaign next to somebody else stuffing envelopes for this campaign and say, hey, what brought you here? You know, and for me to say, I came here because Suraj Patel is the first person running for elected office supporting sex worker rights, and to have the other person say, you know what? That's why I'm here too. What's next for sex worker rights is to recognize the power of our voices. There were estimates that between 10 and 20,000 sex workers live within New York 12. That's a Democratic district. If we were able to turn out all of those voices, then we would have won this election in a landslide. I think that we have to understand that the most important and powerful tool that we have to fight for our humanity are our stories, the stories that we tell each other, the stories that we tell ourselves, and the stories that we tell our community about who we are, what we stand for, and what we're capable of achieving. As many of you know, the organization Survivors Against SESTA, which created a rapid response team to respond to media inquiries around the emergency that was the FOSTA-SESTA law passing, did incredible work and is choosing to end. And I think that this is actually an incredible tactic. There's something that we've learned from Black Lives Matter movement. You cannot assassinate a leaderless movement. Survivors Against SESTA, I know the organizers, I know that they are dedicated to doing this work, but they don't want to be the only voice at the table. They are doing a really, really good job of archiving and saving their work, pictures of the organizing work that they did, email threads, insider decisions, and I want all of our listeners and everyone, all of the old pros and all of the world to know that you can do this work too. There was absolutely nothing magical or special about the smart, dedicated team of badass bitches that came together to create Survivors Against SESTA. You can create your own rapid response team. You can create your own organizing effort. You can do court support for each other. There are so many different ways for you to do this work. Look at what they did, learn from them, add your own flavor to it, but there are no heroes here, right? There are no patron saints. Well, that's not true. Mary Magdalene is a patron. Ishtar. It doesn't matter. I don't want to get too distracted, but there are actually... History is not a big man story. That's something that happens retroactively, where we go back and we look at what happened and then we pick a couple of heroes. Like Martin Luther King was amazing, and also the civil rights movement could have and would have happened without him. There are people that rise to the occasion in the history that they live in, and every one of you can be that person in your own life. This is going to take all of us working together to create magical moments. But Survivors Against SESTA was a really great organization, and I think that their choice to dissolve and to push their collective knowledge back out to the community with a call to action to pick up this thread is something that we should all respond to and is a really, really great tactic. What I learned from working on Suraj Patel's campaign is that when we invite ourselves to the table, people make space for us at the table. So the Democratic Socialists of America have done some really great organizing work. I know that they support sex worker rights, and I also know that once we show up and force our voices to be heard, we can change organizations from the inside, right? NARAL has a history of taking an anti-old pro stance, and I think that that is changing. Let's see where they're at in 2 years. Let's see where now National Organization of Women are. Let's see where Planned Parenthood is. But I think that if those organizations exist in your community, show up, right? Tell your story. Look people in the eye and say, I'm an old pro and I'm here to give my sweat, blood, and tears to the collective organizing around women's bodily autonomy, right? We want to fight for women to have access to abortion, and I want to fight for women to stop being arrested for having consensual sex and surviving. And I believe that there is more support out there than we think. I would also support HOSE, SUPPORT HOSE, which is a great organization. They do a lot of incredible organizing work. Same thing, Survived and Punished. I know supports sex worker rights and also survivors of domestic violence who are currently incarcerated for defending themselves. SWOP Behind Bars is another organization that provides support for sex workers behind bars. You get it, sort of self-explanatory. I've been corresponding with Alicia Walker, who is an inmate who I first was introduced to through the organization Survived and Punished, which partnered with SWOP Behind Bars. And we were writing letters to people who were serving prison for defending themselves against abusers or domestic violence perpetuators. There are lots of women in jail, actually, for defending themselves against abusive partners. And Alicia Walker is specifically an old pro who was convicted at the age of 16 for killing her client. And the prosecutors made her out to be some sort of heartless predator. But I think anyone who's ever done this work knows that you don't kill good clients. That's not a thing that happens. So we've been going back and forth, and she's become a real sex worker rights advocate in prison, which is thrilling to see. And we've been writing letters back and forth, and I hope that when she gets out, we're able to do an interview on the podcast. This is written by Alicia Walker, June 10th, 2018. So you won't believe the conversation I had with my chaplain. We meet once a week. I thought this was super funny once I replayed it in my head. We were on the subject of prostitution. Chaplain: so what would you tell your daughter if she grew up and wanted to be an escort? Alicia: well, if that's something she wanted to do, then I would support her. She'd be grown and can make her own decisions. Chaplain: okay, well, what if I was like, okay, Miss Walker, you convinced me. I'm going to retire early and escort to pay for my retirement. What would you say? Alicia: well, actually, I would be concerned because if you worked here this long and couldn't afford retirement, that's an issue. You probably should have been saving your money and should definitely ask for a raise. Okay, I don't know, what did she expect? I'm so pro-hose, and she wanted me to be like, oh no, chaplain, don't do it. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Then she gave me a book on sex traps. She's actually a great chaplain, and I think she's amazing. I just won't ever change my view on sex workers. LOL, I ran around the prison telling everyone it was International Whores Day, and me and all of my fellow whores wore red lipstick. I wish you nothing but happiness. Good luck. Till next time. I want to give Alicia Walker a round of applause for, even in confinement, right? Even being in a federal prison, she is able to combat this devaluing narrative that is being shoved down her throat in isolation. I think it's incredible. I say old pros on here, and I know that we treat people that have done sex work as like, once a sex worker, then always someone we're going to talk about on this show. But like, being a sex worker is really more like being a waitress than it is like being a Marine. It's not, it's something that you can do for a period of your life, and you know, it's something that will inform the rest of your life. I mean, every time I give somebody a straw, I do that weird waitress thing where they just get like a little straw condom on the top, even if I'm hostessing in my own place. And even though food can be a really intimate familial thing, like food is something that you celebrate with families. It's something very intimate that you know, like mothers pass on to daughters that celebrate big events. And also it's something that a stranger can bring to me and I can pay her for it. And it doesn't detract from my mom's chicken soup recipe. You know what I mean? Thank you so much for listening to The Oldest Profession. The best way to support our work here is to become a patron on Patreon. Of course, you matter more than your money, so if you can't afford to support us financially, please rate and review us on iTunes. You know, the more ratings and reviews we get, the easier it is for other folks to discover us. You can also tell one person about the podcast. I know that a lot of our listeners are not out to their friends and family, and I'll tell you that discussing the podcast is a really great way to open up the topic of sex worker rights, to talk about people other than yourselves, and to find allies where you didn't even know they existed. You know, you can start with a colleague or just somebody on the sidewalk, but if every one of our listeners tells one person about this podcast, we can double the number of people that we reach, and we can double the number of people out there that know that the oldest profession is full of incredible people that have done incredible things for all of human history. You know, stigma is what silences us. And it's that silence that allows these harmful narratives that end up erasing our identity and our contribution to exist. So we can end the silence, and that will chip away at the stigma. Thank you so much for listening. This has been The Oldest Profession.